It's March, it's springtime, and now seems like a very good time to start a miniature nature diary. So in this video, I will be sharing with you how I'm going to be starting my miniature nature diary. I'll share some of the equipment that I'm using, and we'll also head out and look for some inspiration and fill out the first 2 pages. For my miniature nature diary, I am using a 4x4 inch watercolour sketchbook. I can't really give you much of a review on this because I'm using it for the first time as part of this video, and I mainly got it because it is 4x4 inches and that seemed the perfect size for what I'm looking for. This sketchbook is ideal for me, but you might have a favorite that you want to use, and you can go bigger or smaller than this, whatever is most convenient. The great thing about nature diaries is that you can do them kind of however you like. You can be as creative as you want with a nature diary. There are no rules, so you can make this in whatever way works best for you. For the rest of your equipment, the main thing to consider is how you'd like to paint your nature diary. So, would you like to go outside and paint on plein air, on location, or do you want to go out and search for inspiration and then head back home where you can paint from the comfort of your own home with as much equipment as you like? Because that will determine how travel sized your equipment needs to be. For me, I've decided I'd like to do a bit of both. I want to sketch a plein air landscape while I'm out on location, and then I want to paint some other bits and pieces once I get back home. So I wanted to look for things that would be travel sized and easy to carry around with me, and so I'm trialing using this tiny palette. I am going to fill it with colours that I already have. I didn't buy it pre-filled with watercolours. I like the ones that I usually use. I'm using Daniel Smith and Winsor & Newton, and the main thing I wanted to do with this was just get a cool version and a warm version of each of the primary colours to begin with. And then I ended up using burnt sienna and Van Dyke brown to fill in the rest. I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to use to fill up the rest of this palette. I've chosen burnt sienna and Van Dyke brown, but I might change that at a later date. The main thing for me were the 2 versions of each of the 3 primary colours, and the ones I'm using here are Hansa Yellow Light, New Gamboge, Quinacridone Rose, Tyrol Scarlet, Phthalo Blue, and French Ultramarine Blue. I also wanted to trial out some watercolour brushes that also hold the water, just so I don't need to take a separate water container with me. That seemed very convenient. I brought a masking fluid pen, but I didn't end up using it. I also brought a pencil with me and some paper towels and an eraser, although it didn't work very well at the time. I also have a clip to hold the palette to the sketchbook, and that is kind of it for this setup. Some additional items that I added in when I'd done my outside painting were some more paintbrushes so I could add in some extra details, and I also used some gouache for some white highlights at the end. But again, these are just suggestions. As I said before, doing a nature diary, you can be as creative as you want and use whatever equipment works best for you, but this is what I'll be using for today. Once you've got your equipment sorted, the next thing to do is to head out and try and find some nature to put into your nature diary. I'm starting out in the garden because I quite like visiting local places for nature diaries. Nature's always changing, so even if you end up revisiting similar spots, there'll usually be something new for you to see every time you go. And if you feel like you have to go to a nature reserve or somewhere very fancy every time you want to fill out an entry in your nature journal, then it might put you off doing it more regularly. Whereas if you can fill it up with things that you see day to day, it's going to be much more convenient and maybe you'll be more likely to stick to it. It's very early spring at the moment, so we've had some grape hyacinths, some cowslips, some snowdrops, some daffodils, the big ones and the tiny ones, and so the garden had quite a lot of options. For the little things like this, I'm taking video footage or photos of all the things that I see so that I can choose from them later about what I want to put in my nature diary. But I'm not going to paint any of these at the moment. The only thing I'm going to paint on location will be the landscape when I find one. When it comes to looking for inspiration further afield, then it involves all of your senses, I think. Listening out for bird calls and looking for wildflowers on the ground, and just being aware of what's going on around you because you never know what you might want to include in your nature diary. It's always worth taking note of things, even if you don't get a good picture of it, because you could always write it in your nature diary if you hear something singing and you know what it is, or you just want to write in a bit of additional information about what was going on that day. It's all useful. So I like these walks because it's just a chance to soak everything up, and then you can filter through it later and decide what you actually want to include. This is goat willow, and it's really coming out now. These are the catkins and they're just full of pollen, and they start out looking a little bit like that one there, that bud, and then they start out like this and then they obviously grow and the pollen comes out too, and it's a great source of food for bees and for other early pollinators. And if I'm quiet for a moment, you should hear the whole tree is buzzing. When you work on your nature diary, there's so many ways that you can do this. You could decide to choose one day a week where you head out and you look for inspiration and you make that a regular routine. Or you might want to be a little bit more flexible than that. Maybe you just want to take your nature diary wherever you go, and then if you see something, you can paint it in. That way, you might have some weeks where you don't see anything at all, but you might have other days where you do loads of entries. So as I've been walking along, I've noticed something that has caught my eye over there, and it's very, very simple, but it's just some hills and there's a tree and you can see the sky in the distance, and I thought it looked very lovely. So I think I'm gonna try my first plein air painting in this diary. When you're looking for landscape inspiration, it really could come from anywhere, and this wasn't particularly remarkable. I just found a spot that looked interesting. I really liked how the tree was framed by the hills on either side, and so I decided that would make a good first entry into the nature diary. I think sometimes it's a bit nerve-wracking starting a new sketchbook because you don't want to ruin it. But for me, doing a nature diary, it's all about making mistakes and trialing things out and experimenting a bit with your painting, trying out new ideas. It's okay if you make a mess, and it's all right if it doesn't go well, because you just turn the page over and you try again the next day. One thing I really like when I look back at projects like this that I've done before is that you can see the progress through the pages. So I'll start out and it's not so great, but as I flip through the pages, it starts to look better and better. And at the end, I can see the progress I've made. But you're not going to make any progress unless you start. And so just putting paint to paper is the best way forward. It was difficult balancing my phone to record the painting while I was painting standing up outside, so unfortunately there's not more footage of this, but we do pick it up again once I get back home to fill in the rest of the sketchbook. I made a start on the plein air part of the nature diary, and now I'm gonna head home and do the rest of it and put the kettle on. There were a few areas that I wanted to tidy up once I got home. I didn't have a very good eraser on my pencil, so it made a little bit of a mess when I tried to remove some lines, so I tidied that up a bit, and I also added in a little bit more detail. I didn't want to change the overall feel of the plein air landscape because I liked it. I just wanted to try and tidy it up a bit once I had a bit more space and a table to work off of. When it comes to deciding what you want to include in your nature diary, you don't have to put absolutely everything in that you saw, especially if we're working on a small scale. I decided to just pick some of the highlights. I still like to take photos and video footage of loads of things that I see when I'm outside because I never know what things I'm going to want to focus on when I get home. It's always nice to have that extra reference material. But when I do get back, I have a look through and I decide on a couple of things that really stand out. And for me, it was the bumblebee on the catkins, the little rabbit in the distance, the lesser celandine flowers, and the blackthorn blossom. I started out with a quick pencil sketch and now I'm just going over in multiple layers, adding in some watercolour. One thing I really like about doing nature diaries where you're painting lots of subjects at the same time is that you can pretty much continue working all the way through. Sometimes when I'm working on a larger watercolour, I'll have to have a break while layers dry and then I can come back to it, and I don't really have the patience for that. But this is really convenient because as I finish working on one thing, that's drying while I move on to the next subject, and I can just rotate them and I barely need to take a break, which is very good if you are as impatient as I am. One thing I haven't elaborated on is why a miniature nature diary, because obviously you could do a regular size nature diary and that would work just as well. For me, there were a few reasons. I wanted this to be portable because I want to take it around with me wherever I go. So, as inspiration strikes, I will have all the equipment with me and I'll just be able to paint on location. And it's much easier carrying something around like this than it is a larger size sketchbook. Another reason is that I'd really like to be consistent with this, or as consistent as I can be, and I know that if I was working on a larger sketchbook, I probably wouldn't be that consistent. Sometimes just opening an A4 sketchbook and seeing all of that blank space is a bit intimidating, and I don't want to start because I know it's going to take me ages to fill the page. This is 4 by 4 inches. It's super small and it doesn't take a huge amount of effort to fill it up. And so it works really well for doing something like this where you want to keep coming back to it and keep being as consistent as possible. When you do extra little paintings like this in your nature diary, you can be as detailed or not as detailed as you like. It's entirely up to you, and you might find it easier just to do some really simple sketches. Just get the basic outline of whatever it was you saw and then just put some loose washes of watercolour over there for a pop of colour. Another good thing about nature diaries is that you don't have to do the same thing for every single entry. It doesn't matter if it's not consistent. In fact, this could be a really good way of practicing lots of different techniques and lots of different ideas every single time you do an entry. So for this entry, I am painting these tiny additional extra watercolors alongside my plein air landscape. I'm also going to write in the names of the species and put in the date, but I'm not sure I'm going to put too much more than that for this particular entry, but that doesn't mean that has to be how I do it every single time. So sometimes you might want to add in some poetry. Sometimes you might want to write a little bit more, maybe do some creative writing, maybe jot down some of the other things that you saw when you were out that you didn't get a chance to paint. Sometimes you might want to do a double spread of a really huge landscape, or include loads of different things that you saw on the day. You don't have to stick to the same idea for every single entry, and that's another reason why nature diaries are such a good way of practicing painting, because you can just experiment with all of your ideas in something like this, find out what works, and then use those ideas in your other paintings. And that, team, brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed watching this and maybe it's encouraged you to start a nature diary of your own. Let me know if that's something that you are already doing. Pop it in the comments underneath. I hope you found some of this useful and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.